Is the music playing right now? It was playing a second ago, and now I feel like I can't hear it. Yeah.
This music, is it in the room with you?
It's not playing right now, right?
No, it's not.
I guess it's like a new setting on Twitter Spaces. It started playing automatically when I opened the room, which is a nice touch, and then I touched something and now it's gone, unfortunately. Let me let Chad know we're in here. And hey, Toghrul, thanks for coming in.
Hello, thanks for having me.
How do you pronounce your name? Just to make sure we're getting it right.
It's Toghrul. You got it right.
Awesome. Nice to meet you. I'm Pluto. I'm from the Nine Realms team. We are, I think, like a custodian of the protocol, you could say, or one of the lead teams working on sort of delivering from an operational perspective. So I run sort of the software release process. I also do a ton of work on the infrastructure and security side of things.
Gotcha. Nice to meet you.
Sweet. And I'm FamiliarCow. I'm a communications director at Nine Realms, so I do not what Pluto does, but we'll also have Chad up here as well. He should be up here in a minute or two, I think. There he is. Yeah, so I've seen you, Toghrul. I've seen you talking the last couple of days about uh, especially the word trustlessness and bridges. So I'm kind of curious to see like what your general like core thoughts are when it comes to bridges, and then I guess maybe we can just go from there.
Yeah, of course, of course. Should we wait or should I start?
Well, we got Chad B here, and real quick, Chad, do you want to do a quick intro?
A quick intro of myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chad B, one of the one of the core devs on the THORChain project.
Thanks, Chad. Oh, and Toghrul, we didn't get your intro. So, yeah, what's your background?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Toghrul. I work at Scroll, which is a ZK rollup that is building on top of Ethereum. Specifically, our rollup is EVM equivalent. That's the term we like to use. It's basically what it allows you to do is you can copy the code that you deployed on Ethereum, the bytecode, EVM bytecode, deploy it on Scroll, and it will work out of the box. And my background is in computer science. I've came into crypto in around 2016. Started with Bitcoin, but swiftly moved to Ethereum and been in and around consensus protocols. My main interest is consensus protocols and scaling. So I've been working on sharding and stuff like that for a long time.
Cool. So let's start off with bridges, I think, because I think that's a common area of criticism from the THORChain side and also from your perspective. So I'm curious to think like what you think about bridges, what bridges do well, like where the security uh vulnerabilities lie within bridges, like what parts are okay with bridges and then what parts really need a second uh look at in terms of security. So what are your thoughts there?
I think, first of all, before I start, I think the problem with bridges in a lot of cases is the fact that we don't really have a concrete definition of what a bridge is and what certain types of bridges are. For example, Defend has this bridge with Bitcoin, but because it's enshrined in the protocol, similar to how THORChain is, they claim that it's not a bridge. So it's been quite difficult to discuss what bridges are before because certain people just don't agree on a definition of a bridge. So I would say anything that introduces that basically allows the communication of to otherwise independent protocols that introduces an additional assumption is a bridge. So let's say if you're connecting a rollup to Ethereum, it's still a bridge that is connecting the rollup to Ethereum, and everything else that connects, I don't know, Ethereum to Bitcoin, or I don't know, repayment protocols, Lightning Network, everything uses a bridge. And then we
one question to that. One question
of course, yeah.
is: would you consider Binance or Coinbase to be a bridge then, or
no? I think on paper it is a bridge because it's essentially an EOA that you deposit money in that can reroute money to another chain. So on paper, I would say it's still a bridge. It's just a very, very trusted bridge.
Okay, so
it's not very decentralized.
So by your definition of the term bridge, basically everything is a bridge.
Everything that connects two different independent protocols together is a bridge, yeah.
Yeah. Is it fair to take that definition a step further and say a bridge is any system that represents the same asset on two different networks? Because I think that's a bit more narrower of a definition, but I think that's like what an L2 does. That's what like a rollup does. That's what most of our ideas of what bridges are traditionally, or what at least my idea of a bridge would be.
The common misconception is that people think that a bridge is when you basically move assets from one protocol to another. But in reality, you can just move messages. So let's say in a rollup, there is a scenario where you don't actually have to move the assets to the L2. What you can do is you can custody the assets on the L1 bridge contract and then just pass the messages from the L2 dictating what you should do with the assets that are custodied on the bridge. And so you never have to physically bridge the assets, but you can pass the messages that dictate what to do with those assets on the L1.
But is it fair then to say that you're now representing an asset from network A on network B, but network B has an idea of a representation of an asset, network A has a representation of that asset, and the bridge is meant to reconcile the two representations of the same asset on two different networks?
It doesn't have to be a representation. So what you can do, for example, is you can create a smart contract on an L1 that allows you to define the spending rules, and the spending rules might be that a certain L2 message can trigger the spending rules. So technically, you can say that the asset is bridged, but there's no token minted on the other side. You're basically just passing messages from L2 that dictate what to do on an L1.
Well, we don't have to get too much into this kind of detail, just because I want to hear your synopsis or your viewpoint, and we don't have to get too into the details of the definition of the term bridge. Like, as long as we understand what you mean when you say the word bridge,
yeah.
Which in this case you're basically saying more or less everything basically is a bridge, more or less, and which I can accept that your definition temporarily for the purpose of the conversation.
Yeah, fair. So I didn't completely understand your question. So my synopsis in terms of different types of bridges, or specifically THORChain?
Well, no, I think what Cow on the THORChain account was kind of like, it's just kind of get from you your kind of synopsis or your viewpoint or your kind of how bridges are, or what defines as a bridge, or this kind of thing. And I think you've defined the term bridge, at least from your definition, which is, we can operate on that definition for now. And then the question becomes like, I think the next thing that you were talking about, it was about the term trustless. Like, how do you define the word trustless, or do you find a difference between the word trustless and the word trust minimized, or like how do you see those words in your mind?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So I would define trustless as let's say a trustless interaction with a protocol would be something where you're running a full node. So there is a certain set of assumptions that you need to make in order to run a full node, and you don't need to add any more assumptions to interact with the asset. So let's say if you're running a Bitcoin full node, you don't need to make any other assumptions to interact with your Bitcoin on chain. Whereas,
but you're making some assumption at that point, correct?
what you're making assumptions, but they're part of the protocol. So the honest majority assumption is still there. Then the synchronicity assumption for the networking, etc., etc. It's part of the protocol. I meant you don't make any more assumptions on top of that.
So are you saying that? So would you consider something like Bitcoin to be a trustless system, or would you say trust minimized?
If you use a full node and you interact with Bitcoin with a full node, yes, it's trustless. It's a trustless mode of operation. You still have trust assumptions, but they're baked into the protocol. You don't add any more assumptions.
Okay, but if you have trust assumptions, why would you consider it to be called trustless?
I think the argument there is that we need some kind of a baseline. So let's say if we call this trust minimized, and then we add another assumption for a light client, let's say, it's technically still trust minimized, but you can't really differentiate between the two.
Okay, so I think this is an important point. So I think what you're kind of getting at there is that any particular system, there are assumptions that are being made, whether it be Bitcoin or a bridge or like smart contracts or whatever it might be. There are assumptions that are being made, and there are trust aspects that are being placed on you interact with those systems. So the term trust is a scale, kind of similar to the word decentralization. Is a scale, right? You can be really decentralized, or it can be like really centralized, and then there's a lot of things in between, right? And so when you interact with something like Bitcoin, for example, like Bitcoin has this concept of like I think it's called nlock, whatever. But it basically allows you to like lock up Bitcoin for like the next 10 years, something like that. You can like, if you wanted to like gift some Bitcoin to your daughter, I mean, you don't want her to access it until she's like 8 years old, you can do that. But even the most hardcore Bitcoin maximalists will tell you not to fucking do it, right? And the reason why is because there can be some changes made to the Bitcoin protocol into the future, because changes can be made, and all of a sudden the rules of that nlock system can change underneath you, but you don't have the ability to move your Bitcoin or protect yourself. And so people kind of advise people to not actually use that system. So like using any protocol, because the rules can't be changed, Bitcoin or THORChain or like, you know, your L2 or whatever it might be, all these things can change underneath you, and therefore requires trust. And the question becomes like, how much trust is there, right?
But the thing is, with Bitcoin, you can still run the old version, and you'll still guaranteed access. You'll be guaranteed access to those funds at some chain. It doesn't mean that it's going to be the chain that is accepted by everyone.
Right. Okay. So I just kind of lined out a reasoning of why you could lose your Bitcoin on Bitcoin, like a legitimate actual thing.
Yeah.
Now, if your argument is, okay, the rules were changed and I don't like these new rules, and therefore I will stay on the old fork, if you want to call it that, soft fork, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, nobody's mining your old soft fork because all the mining hash rate went to with the new changes. And so the Bitcoin that you had is now basically worth like probably 10 cents because nobody's fucking mining it, right? So it's effectively goes to zero, right?
Yeah.
So if you have your full node and you think you have your Bitcoin, which is in some sense true, it doesn't mean that Bitcoin is worth anything, because if nobody's mining it, then the value is fucking zero, right? And so you lost your Bitcoin. In effect, well, you lost the value of it. You didn't lose the coins technically, but you lost the value of it. What the only thing we really care about is the value. We don't really care about the actual tokens themselves. We care about the value, right?
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yes, from the perspective of the value, but also bear in mind that you're going into the social consensus aspect of protocols then, because in this case, you can say the same for like, if the majority agrees that you need to reorg the chain for the last week, and everybody accepts that as a canonical chain, that's also true. But we still refer to Bitcoin as immutable, despite the fact that it is possible under if the social consensus agrees to that. So I think it's the similar thing here, where you assume that it's possible that for some reason the rules will be changed and nobody will be mining the chain, the old chain that you support, but you're still guaranteed access to your Bitcoin at some chain. Doesn't have to
Right.
be supported
But
by
who
anyone.
cares? But who cares at that point? What's the point of having that Bitcoin if it's worth 0 cents?
Uh, realistically, not really, but I think it's an unlikely scenario where everyone except for you will support
Right,
the
but
change.
we're not talking about what's likely or not likely. We're talking about what are the trust mechanisms of interacting with any particular system, and we're just defining if there are trust mechanisms built into Bitcoin itself. And there's trust mechanisms into Ethereum, there's trust mechanisms built into basically every blockchain that exists, or every system that exists, in fact. And so the question becomes, well, how many trust aspects are there? What are the trust mechanisms that are being put into play, right? Like for WBDC, for example, I have to trust that the people running that are going to hold the value of the Bitcoin, like actually can hold my Bitcoin for me, right? And they are economically incentivized to actually just steal that Bitcoin and run off, like
it's a multi-sig essentially.
It's a multi-sig, and thankfully, those people are operating in an altruistic manner, meaning that they're not operating in their personal best interest, but they're operating in the best interest of the protocol that they're operating. And it's a different assumption to say than THORChain's case of like things are secured not by altruistic behaviors, but rather economic incentives, which is the same systems that like something like Bitcoin uses to ensure proper behavior within the Bitcoin network. Like nobody's going to 51% attack Bitcoin because it'd be more profitable to just fucking mine it and be like a miner than to like try to like fucking take it over because the price would go to fucking zero after that point, right? It doesn't make any sense to 51% of Bitcoin. No economic sense to 51% attack Bitcoin. So it'd be unlikely to do it unless you're like fucking Putin and you want to just like ruin the world in some sense. But like for a self-interested person, nobody's going to 51% Bitcoin because it doesn't make any mathematical sense to do so.
I actually disagree with that, because the reason why we operate under honesty assumptions rather than a rationality assumption is because it's non-trivial to prove that there is no incentive compatible way to earn more money by basically subverting the protocol rules. And so while it's unlikely to happen.
But if you subvert the protocol rules, like say I got 51% of the mining power of Bitcoin, for example, and I could just change the rules. All right, there's no longer 21 million. It's 20 million plus another 21 million that I just minted into my own wallet. That's the change that I'm making because I have 51% and I can do the fuck I want, right? I have the majority of hash rate. Now the value of that Bitcoin that I have, the 21 million that I minted myself, is probably worth very like $100.
Yeah, of course.
In reality, nobody's gonna fucking buy that shit. Nobody's gonna buy that shit. So I am economically incentivized to not do that and just mine Bitcoin like a regular fucking person, who's mining Bitcoin in the world, because that Bitcoin will maintain its value, right? Because it's obeying by the rules that everybody who's buying and holding Bitcoin, we're all agreeing to the same rules. We all believe in the same concepts. And so as long as those rules don't change underneath us, we will all probably continue to hold it. Now, if we change the rules and we say, all right, we're going to increase the block size from, whatever it is now, I think it's like 2 megabytes, whatever it is, to 8 megabytes. Like I think that's what Bitcoin Cash did. Well, then Bitcoin Cash exists, and like nobody fucking has that either because Bitcoin Cash is like market cap is relatively very small, relative to Bitcoin, right? So like it's just like the economic incentives. There's a difference between trusting systems of trusting a person to act, in the correct fashion, and trusting somebody that they're self-interested and they won't act against their own self-interest. That's what I talk about when I talk about THORChain being trustless, right? When I'm not saying the trust mechanisms that we're referring to in like nlocks and Bitcoin or these things. What I'm referring to when I use that word, what I'm referring to is you're not trusting the person to do the right thing because they're afraid of Johnny Law, or they're just being altruistic. You're trusting that they're self-interested, right? Which is a completely different thing, right? When you're talking about trust, it sounds like you're just talking about the trust assumptions that you make on any given system. And you're right that there are more trust things that you have to make with operating with THORChain than you do with like just layer one Bitcoin or layer one Ethereum. That's totally true. Totally right. But I would still say that THORChain is quote unquote trust minimized, or maybe trustless, depending how you define the term, just because the things that you are making, the trust that you're making is based upon self-interested dynamics rather than like sex, or WBDC mechanisms of like altruistic tendencies. Is that fair to say? Am I making sense?
No, I completely get it, but let me just go back to the self-interest part that you said. So when you're saying that it's the most rational path to basically follow the protocol rules and do whatever everybody else agrees with, yeah, I agree with that. And if you assess the protocol in a vacuum where nothing else is happening in the world, but there's a great paper by Brian Ford from like 2018. It's called Rationality is Self-Defeating and Permissionless Systems. And he makes a semi-formal argument that unless Bitcoin is the most valuable asset in the world, there's always a possibility that there's a rational path to basically subverting the protocol rules and still being the most profitable strategy out there. So, and that's one of the reasons why we use honesty assumptions. But yeah, I completely agree that.
So can you give me an example of what you're talking about there? Like, give me an example of a scenario where irrationality is self-defeating in the context of Bitcoin. Give me an example of that.
So if you find an instrument that would allow you to short Bitcoin in a way that will be more profitable than the cost to attack Bitcoin, assuming that the price will drop once you attack it, then it's going to be more profitable to subvert the protocol rules rather than to follow the protocol rules.
So in that particular example, if I were to have the ability to attack Bitcoin, meaning that I have 51% of the Bitcoin and I'm earning a lot of Bitcoin per block, right?
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. And instead of doing that and just earning all that money, I decide to buy shorts, get huge quantities of investment. Let's just call it like $500 million, right? Or $100 million, some amount. And then I go to some exchange and I short it in the interest of making money in that mechanism. Do you think it'd be more profitable to make money by mining it? In this case, it'd be more profitable to short it.
It's possible, depending on what you do as an attack, how the market reacts on the like aftermath of the attack, etc. So there are a lot of different, and it's definitely possible that it can be more profitable. Is it likely? Not. No, but you can't discount it completely, and that's the point. So while you minimize the possibility of doing that, of somebody doing that by introducing incentives, disincentives, etc., you can't completely discount it.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm discounting it, but I'm just trying to evaluate in a particular example that you're bringing up, how much does that make sense for a person to actually execute on, right? That's what I'm trying to establish in this context. Like your argument is basically saying that like rationality isn't 100%, and there are scenarios where rationality is 100% in the sense that if they find to be more rational to attack Bitcoin and short it, then that's the rational thing, and that's for rationality is still winning in that particular context. It's not self-defeating; it's actually self-winning, I guess, or something. But you're saying in hypothetical scenarios that there could be some rationality that would be more profitable to attack Bitcoin than to not, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean that's an killed my Can you hear me again?
Hello. Yeah. Sorry, I broke
Sorry, I
down.
got a phone call.
Yeah, my connection.
My phone just kicked out.
I thought it was
No,
me.
it was me. I got a phone call and I just killed my my spaces here. Let me put my focus thing on here so it doesn't happen again. So So the idea of like shorting, Bitcoin and then attacking that's actually a scenario that we talked about actually in the white paper, on the economic white paper of THORChain. And we acknowledge that that's like a reasonable attack vector in some sense, right? That if you are able to, symbol attack the network in one form or another, and then destroy the network, and while shorting it on some, some exchange, like Binance or whatever, that could be a profitable attack, which is why we actually talk about in that web.
I'm assuming someone's calling Chad back. There's someone from the comments who wanted to come up. Let me bring them up in the meantime.
Yeah, of course.
Chad, you back? All right, he's gone. Bullshitter. Hey, maybe bully shitter. Hey, what's up, man?
Nothing much, man. I just see some builders. I'm interested in interacting, man.
Sorry, what I was saying. Hopefully, you guys can hear me, okay? But what I was saying is that in THORChain's case, because the primary use case and the primary demand center for Rune is its own network, because that's where all the yield is and that's where the swaps are and all that kind of stuff, that it's not practical to short it on external exchanges, because this is not enough Rune on external exchanges to make it viable with a viable attack vector.
No, I agree that the possibility of achieving that with Thor is probably quite low, but to like on the verge of negligible.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that while it's negligible, it's still possible, and so the difference between, let's say, obviously you can't draw an equivalence line between an equivalent sign between, let's say, a BTC that is bridged to Thor and BTC that is bridged to Ethereum via WBTC. In one case, you have a lot of incentives and disincentives backing the correctness of the nodes that are custodying it, whereas in the other case, there are no on-chain incentives. The only incentives is basically the reputation being upheld of the people who are custodying the funds. So it would be incorrect to put an equivalent sign between those two bridging mechanisms, but it would be also incorrect to call Thor's approach trustless, because, let's say, rollups require weaker assumptions than THORChain to function, because there are no incentives or disincentives. You just rely on cryptography in case of zero knowledge rollups. But we still don't call them trustless. We call them trust minimized.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting into the nuance of trustless versus trust minimized. Like, probably the more accurate term to be used for THORChain is not trustless, because there are trust aspects that you have to make as part of it. Trust minimized is probably a more fair term to be used, right? The community as a whole, not just THORChain, but just the general crypto community, tends not to use that word. They tend to just lean towards the word trustless, just because it just sounds better, I suppose. But yeah, I think it's more fair. It's a more accurate term to use, trust minimized, for THORChain or for Bitcoin or any of this. Like, nothing is actually trustless. Like, no system is actually trustless, and so everything is basically trust minimized.
Yeah, of course.
Right. Like, Coinbase is not like trust minimized; it's highly trustful. But
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to think where your guys' definition of this bends, not of the word trustless itself, but of like some of the examples of bridges, including THORChain.
Bullish, you came on the stage, and I'm not sure if I heard you speak something. I was dealing with some phone issues here. But did you have something you wanted to add or whatever?
Well, y'all having a great conversation right now. I wanted to inquire about the slashing protocol for THORChain nodes. Well, this goes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess.
Let's define what a trustless means. I'd like to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, like, as I was saying earlier, the concept of the term trustless is used inoperably or interchangeably, interchangeably with trust minimized. Like, those two words are just used interchangeably. They probably shouldn't be from a textbook definition perspective, but they generally are, right? Which is confusing and maybe even misguiding to some sense. But trustless means that there's no trustless system, and the only time that's true is when you're operating with yourself, right? Which most people, there's no value in operating. There's no money.
Even then you delve into philosophy and whether you exist or no, etc., etc. There are a lot of, even then you can't fully trust that you're interacting.
Sure, you can get into some deep, like,
So I don't think there's a scenario ever where you don't have to trust at least something.
I mean, I can take this, Coke can on my desk here and throw it in the air, and I trust that it'll hit the earth, right? And so in that case, I'm trusting the mechanics of physics, right, and gravity and gravitrons and all these kind of things to make sure that, and that's trustless, right? I mean, unless something crazy happens where, I don't know, time stops or something like this, and gravity no longer is taking effect, or something like this, like, then that would change. But even like within, quantum mechanics, for example, like in quantum mechanics, if you sit in a chair long enough, eventually you'll pass through it, right? It doesn't make sense in real world. But like, so there's trust there that if I sit down in a chair in the quantum world, that I will actually sit on it and not fall through it. But then really there's that's a trust assumption because you actually may pass through it. So but for all intents and purposes, we should maybe just not use the word trustless. But the reality is that everybody uses the word just because it sounds better than trust minimized. Because trust minimized is a complicated term because, like, well, you're not saying trustless. You're saying there's some trust, but then what trust are you saying, right? And then that opens up a larger conversation of like, well, the trust that will be named, long drawn out conversation. Whereas trustless, it just like ends the conversation and you understand what I'm trying to fucking say.
So I think we need a way to define the baseline assumptions for every protocol. So with every protocol that you interact with, so let's say Ethereum, Bitcoin, whatever else, Avalanche, you have a certain baseline set of assumptions that you have to make no matter what you do. Like, they're inevitable. And so I think trustless is a good way to refer to like the fact that you're only making those assumptions and you're not. It's a misnomer because it's the same as impermanent loss, for example. I hate that term because it doesn't really mean anything. But people still use it. I think with trustless, it's the same thing. You need to somehow define the baseline set of assumptions for every protocol.
Yeah, and that's fair, and that's partially what our white paper does. You should always list out, how the thing functions and works. What are the assumptions being made? And I think, in our white paper specifically, that's the one I understand pretty fairly well. We line out, all the assumptions that are made. Like, we make an assumption, for example, that no more than 1/3 of the validator set is malicious, for example, right? We make assumptions that that the network is economically secure because it's financially impractical to attack as long as there's not enough rune on. Sometimes exchanges to short the quantity of value that you would earn from the stealing of the Bitcoin and Ethereum and various assets. So we go through like in pretty good detail if you read through the white paper of like, these are the assumptions that are being made.
Yeah.
And
I don't remember the details. I've read it a couple of years ago, so I don't remember all the details, but I remember the main parts of it.
Yeah. I haven't read it myself in probably a couple of years too.
Fair enough.
I don't really feel like to read it.
Yeah, once you're done with it, you're done with it. You're off. You're off building something that basically improves it. You don't need to reread it every day.
Yeah, well, like I am one of the two people that architected, designed the whole thing, so I feel like I got a pretty good understanding of it.
Yeah. Fair, makes sense.
But I'm not actually wrote one. The guy actually wrote the text. I'm not a very good writer. I write computer language, not human language. So he's much better than me at that.
Yeah.
Anyways,
there'd be a lot more profanity in a white paper.
This all comes down to just like definitions of terms, and so like, for example, like you were talking about bridge is basically anything that connects value or communication between one ecosystem to another. And that's a real definition. I'm not saying it's incorrect or anything like that. That's a reasonable definition. When I think about the term bridge, like for me, it's just like when you're trying to send something across like an asset. That's how I associate it to be, or maybe a message could be also be a valuable way of doing it. But because there's no actual like passing of anything between the two, just moving value on one chain, moving value on another chain. But between those two chains, there's no actual real communication happening or anything like that, or transpiring of things. That's why I don't consider THORChain to be a bridge and under Coinbase to be a bridge. Although I hear your argument, and I think it's a reasonable, way of looking at it. I don't think that's necessarily wrong. But that's how I determine it. And then and when I talk about words like trust, I'm talking about like what are the trust mechanisms at play? Not so much is there trust or is there not trust, but are the mechanisms like altruism or is it basically economic incentives, right? And in our ecosystem, like our world, our crypto space itself is trying to get away from the trust systems, like try to get away from the altruism systems. Like Web2 is altruistic and banks are altruistic in some sense. And get more towards economic incentives, which is what Bitcoin is, and it's what Ethereum is, and that's what any well-designed system should have incentives align with it. Like Jack from Twitter, he's like investing money into like Nostr and Blue Sky, and like to my knowledge, I haven't been able to determine any kind of like economic incentives with these things, and so it's just like I don't know why it would actually function, but other than people just choosing to run nodes in a trustful fashion.
Yeah,
but that's how I define the term, and that's when I talk about these things publicly or with the community. That's what I'm referring to. Does that make sense?
No, I completely get your side. I just think that because we use trustless in different contexts, in different ways, it muddies up the waters a bit. So we get to a point where, like, for example, somebody refers to, so for example, Avalanche, their Ethereum Avalanche bridge, they use it's just a multi-sig essentially that is protected by SGX, but essentially it's a multi-sig. They used to refer to it as a trustless bridge.
But it's like the SGX part of it is, to be honest, it's straight up horseshit. Like the SGX gives you nothing of value. Like because like in the end, if you have 5, I think there's 6 wardens. Maybe there's 11 wardens. I can't remember the exact number. 8 wardens. And if you gain access to, if it's a multi-sig and you get access to, was it
6 of them?
6 of 8. Then you get all the funds, and if it's a multi-sig with SGX and you get access to 6 of the 8, you still get all the funds. Like the XGX part of it doesn't really do anything at all.
So really I refer to it as a glorified dealer for distributed key generation process because that's what it is. That's the only thing that it does. Because let's say if you control 6 wardens, you can still sign transactions that don't actually exist and just withdraw the funds. It doesn't actually check whether the transactions are valid or not. Yeah,
that's part of the issue with wardens or federations or any of these systems, right? And that's what we rail against. Is this community is like, to my knowledge, I can't think of one example other than us. Is like we're the only ones that secure exogenous capital, Bitcoin, Ethereum, other assets in a way that is not used by some sort of trust or federation of some kind. Like to my knowledge, we're the only ones that actually do this. Everybody else just kind of requires trust of the validators, or trust of the wardens, or trust of the federation to make sure everything's not like just rugged or whatever. We're the only ones that do this, and that's really sad because like this is what this industry is built to do, is to remove those kind of trust systems, remove that kind of altruistic tendencies of requirement of altruism to like maintain security, and move towards like incentive based economic. People are incentivized to act rationally, to do the best thing, not in the interest of everybody, but the interest of themselves as individuals.
No, I completely get it. Just one question. I don't remember. I haven't looked into it in a while. But isn't TBTC also using a similar model where they have capital bonded that protect the deposits?
Yes, but the difference is that because the asset that you're bonding with and the asset that you're securing are completely isolated from each other, not coupled at all.
Yeah.
Right. And so if the price of your asset that you're bonding dives by 80%, let's just say hypothetically, well, now you're in a place where the bonding value is far less than the thing that you're trying to secure. So like if you give me $10 to secure money and I give $1,000, like you'll just steal $1,000 and never get your $10 back.
It's rational to do that. Yeah.
Right. But in THORChain's case, because all of the pools have Rune in it, which Rune is the bonding asset.
Yeah.
In the event that Rune's price dives by 80%, arbitrage bots effectively send in a bunch of Rune and take out a bunch of Bitcoin. And so to always ensure that the value of the Bitcoin and Ethereum is always worth less than the bond, the dollar value of the bond. Those things it's always you can't do the fact that they're bonding with TBDC like with another asset. That it's helpful. I mean, it's better than nothing, right? I mean, that's it's good. I guess that's good. And assuming that
it's better than a multi-sig, obviously.
Right, but then even at that point, it's just like, well, they have access. They run the network themselves as well, so it's like, I don't know.
I'm not saying from the permissionlessness perspective. I was just asking from the bonding perspective because I haven't looked into it in like a few years, but I remember that they were also working on a bonding mechanism.
Although I will give credit to, if I understand correctly, and I didn't read the paper, I just spoke to one of the guys behind it in a quick 10-minute conversation. So I will give credit though to SBDC on stacks, just because they've actually figured out a different way of doing it where they are securing with a different asset than the asset they're securing. So they use STX as the bonding asset and Bitcoin as the asset, but they have like a liquidation system. So that if the value of the STX drops below the value of the Bitcoin they're securing, then they get liquidated, right? Yeah. And so they're incentivized, at least at some point, they're incentivized to top up and put more stacks in just to make sure they don't get liquidated. But even with that, it's like I still get a little uneasy about it, just because
you have to constantly keep topping up in case.
Right. Well, not only that, like when you top up, you're taking on more price exposure to the STX asset, and then. Is there a case and scenario where like it doesn't make sense to like, okay, stacks is going down, am I going to buy more stacks just to like top up my position? Probably not, right? And so it makes assumptions in that regard, but at least that's one of the better systems that I've seen. It's still not as good as THORChain implementation, but it is one of the better ones, I would say.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because are you referring to the new model that they just announced a few weeks ago? Is that the one that you're referring to?
Yeah. I was talking to one of the guys behind it at the Bitcoin conference in Miami like a while back. This conference happened a while, so maybe they've changed some of the design aspects, and I haven't heard of the new changes. So
no, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. I'm just
apologies if I got something wrong, but
you didn't.
It is a fascinating way of going at it, and it does, at least in partially or a good part of it, solves the problem of having the bonding asset being different than the asset that you're actually securing, which is a difficult problem. I appreciate the innovation. I appreciate the idea of like experimentation and trying new ideas and concepts, and may the best thing win. Like hopefully Darwinism takes over, and whatever works survives, and whatever doesn't work,
survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest. And that's why, like, even in like literally in nature, like 97+% of all animal life on this planet is extinct, right? Vast majority of life is like died because they had a mutation that didn't work so well. A deer like became bright pink or something like this, didn't work so well, and so they died out. And so I expect the same thing to happen in this space, like in crypto itself. It's like 97% of projects are probably going to die, and they probably should die, and just allow.
Completely agree. Yeah.
The few that actually have a good structure and fundamentals, blah 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 blah, whatever those might be. Hopefully that's THORChain, and hopefully that's your project, and like all this kind of stuff. But like we don't know what they actually are. We have to wait for the reality to set in and tell us which things work and which things don't work. And then eventually the net result is even the projects that fail. Let's say THORChain fails, for example. We proved what did work, and we proved what didn't work.
Yeah. Always learn from the mistakes.
You can learn from the failures. Like Terra collapse, for example. We learned a bunch about algo tables, for example, and what didn't work about Terra's design and blah 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 blah. So hopefully that will inform future generations or future iterations to like keep that in mind and learn from our mistakes and build better, more robust systems.
Yeah, true. I mean, with THOReau, there were so many algo stables that collapsed before it that we should have learned before THOReau became
Well,
a 40
no,
billion.
Hold on there. So each individual of those algo stables had different implementations and different designs, right? And they all failed for
Yeah.
different reasons, right? They all failed, and they all came to the same kind of cataclysmic ending. But the reasons why they failed, like for example, like iron, for example, and what was the stable coin for that? I can't remember what the stable was.
Oh,
Ironworks.
yeah.
I'm blanking on the name of it.
Yeah.
But the reason why they failed was because the oracle for the price of the volatile asset, we had like a delay to it, and so the price was falling much faster than the oracle could inform the smart contract, and then that destroyed the arbitrage ability to actually arbitrage the asset, and then therefore the whole thing just basically crumbled into a mess until there wasn't any sell pressure onto the volatile asset, and the oracle was then correct, right? Giving the correct information, allowing arbitrage to arbitrage, which is why that token still exists today, and it maintains its peg, even though its market cap is basically near zero, right close to zero.
Yeah, true.
Because nobody fucking owns that shit. Because obviously it's not, a long-term viable thing. It already failed. But my point is that like each one of those algo stable designs have different implementations, and they failed for different reasons. And so as long as we're paying attention and we're learning and we're adjusting and trying new concepts, right? Like Bitcoin's a good example where people tried. There's been 100 forks, Super Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash, and Litecoin, and like there's been like hundreds of forks of Bitcoin, and they've all
Bitcoin, Satoshi's vision, everyone's favorite.
Some of them are just like straight up scams, like Bitcoin SV is a straight up scam, and some are like legitimate attempts of improvement. Like Bitcoin Cash was born out of the arguments in 2017 about block
the
size.
Small blocks,
Yeah, so they just like, we're just going to create a new thing, and then like that kind of destroyed the arguments about actually changing Bitcoin, because anybody who wanted a bigger block just basically migrated over to Bitcoin Cash world, right?
Yeah.
And so like, but like what's fascinating now is that like you don't see any Bitcoin forks anymore, right? It's like this fascinating thing of like you can always tell.
People learned
that Bitcoin is like you can't just fork Bitcoin and have some glory stats, like bigger block size or faster block time or something like this, and then it's better and then everybody adopts it and blah blah blah. It's not that simple. It's not that straightforward. There's this kind of the strong tendency we see in like if you go to like a bookstore, right, anywhere in America, and you look on books about consciousness, like a topic that is very much debated and misunderstood or researched, there'll be 1,000 books, like thousands of books about consciousness, but things that are settled. Things that are like there's no more debates about, like Newtonian physics, for example. If you go to the bookstore, look for a book on Newtonian physics, you're just going to find like one or two. You're not going to find 1,000 of them because there's no debate about whether or not Newtonian physics works or not, or how it functions, or what the mathematics are. So there's not new books being created. And similarly, there's not new forks of Bitcoin. We challenged it back in the day whether or not Bitcoin will work or not. What if we change the block size? What if we change? We add Schnorr signatures early. What if we add better smart contract capabilities? We tried all these concepts, and the result of it was, no, I think we're kind of settled. Like Bitcoin is Bitcoin. You don't need to fucking fork it anymore and try to make some changes to it. Like we've pretty much figured it out, right? And now Ethereum is going through the same thing of like, well, is Ethereum the right answer? Okay, well, we have all these challengers. We have AVAX, and we have Solana, and we have Algorand, and maybe the result is, Ethereum is right, and Ethereum is going to be the winner, and all those other chains will basically fall to the wayside, just as all those Bitcoin forks did. Or maybe, maybe AVAX will win. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying AVAX would, or what. I'm just like speaking in hypotheticals here. But eventually, at some point, it's getting to the point where like all those challengers to Ethereum, all these ETH killers, quote unquote, something's going to win. And maybe that's Ethereum, maybe it's something else. I don't really know. But at some point, something's going to win, and we're not going to see any more like challengers, in a sense.
I a bit disagree with that, because I think there's not a single chain that can satisfy all the potential demand that is there for block space. And also, you shouldn't be saying that, because if there's only one chain, there's no reason to connect between two chains. So THORChain becomes. Okay, sorry. I misunderstood you then.
Each individual chain has a different unique purpose and proposition, but something that's competing for the same, like Bitcoin Cash is competing for the same space at Bitcoin, right? It's trying to beat Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe you can make an argument that something like Solana or maybe an L2 is going for faster transaction speeds, which is you would use an application in this scenario where you would use a different application for a different scenario. Like it's okay to have like different chains that provide different services. Just like on the internet, we have basically one search engine, which is Google. I mean, there are other ones that do exist, but like basically nobody uses them. We have one place to buy books, right, which is Amazon. There are other ones that exist, but nobody really uses them. And we have one place for secondary markets, which is predominantly eBay, or maybe you could argue it's Facebook Marketplace, whatever. And so there's a tendency to aggregate into once like it's been established that there's a winner, which nobody's really challenging Google, really. Nobody's really challenging Amazon, for example. That, for the most part, they're pretty much locked into that position unless something huge comes out, like not evolutionary, but revolutionary comes out. But largely speaking, that's what's the case. So there's going to be Bitcoin, and there's going to be something that's in the smart contract realm, and there's going to be something that does other types of protocols, something that does, storage, and something that does this, and something that does that. And all those protocols are going to need the ability to transfer value between those two systems, which is where THORChain's, value prop is.
Yeah, of course. I think oh, sorry.
I got a question for you, Chad, and this one's interesting. Someone was asking me about like why is Cosmos such an interesting ecosystem to work in, but I think that with the transition of like Ethereum to proof of stake, you kind of see the real clear differentiators between sort of the app chain Cosmos ecosystem and the EVM ecosystem starting to get like there's fewer differentiators between the two. Do you think EVM and Cosmos will continue to be like two major categories that compete, or do you think we'll start to coalesce around one as sort of like one app chain that just becomes like the general purpose computing smart contract? And do you think Cosmos or EVM is more effectively positioned, or do you think they'll still be like completely separate forever?
Well, so my personal viewpoint is that smart contracts in general are not how do I put this? They're not good for large scale applications. They're good for sandboxing. They're good for testing. They're good for kind of experimentation and kind of quickly throwing something together and seeing how it kind of fares. But they don't work well on the larger scale of things, and that's partially because of shared security. To me, is inherently problematic because any developer, worth his weight in salt, wants to have full control over the environment of their application they're building, right? So the equivalent for this in the Web 2 space is Heroku, right? You can deploy a Ruby on Rails app onto Heroku in the weekend, which is really great. It's actually very useful in this context. I use Heroku myself for various purposes or values. But I would never build, if I was going to build a startup to compete against Twitter, let's just say, I would never build it on fucking Heroku. Like that would be a disaster, right? Because you wouldn't want to deploy a video game onto Ethereum and then have the gas prices become so expensive that nobody can buy a sword or something like this because not practical. You want to be able to have full control over your complete environment. As any developer would want that. Like it's silly if you didn't. It's useful to use Heroku to try out ideas. Right? I have a couple of chatbots that I've deployed onto Heroku, for example, just to interact with Discord and that kind of stuff, which is very useful in that context. But if I was going to build a real thing that would have real adoption, have massive use case, it doesn't make sense to put that on a smart contract in many cases. Now it does if you're doing NFTs, that's fine. You use smart contracts for NFT, that's fine. But DeFi specifically, no, absolutely 100%. It's the wrong place for it. And the reason why that is because you do not want to have your DeFi protocol be lashed to some specific ecosystem that will only give you some amount of liquidity or value. What's better designed from structurally, and I think anybody objectively speaking would agree with me on this, is to have your DeFi protocol work with any and all ecosystems and have access to the full liquidity of the entire cryptocurrency market, and you will have much more trade volume, TVL, blah, 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 all these things, just because you're positioned to be able to acquire more than any other protocol like in the crypto space. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
The thing is, the only thing is the DeFi protocol can live, for example, on Ethereum and use Ethereum as a hub where you bridge from different chains to Ethereum. It doesn't have to be like intermediary.
But
So,
then you're
so,
using,
so, so,
but then you're
oh,
using
sorry.
wrapped assets. But then you're using wrapped assets, and you're leaning on altruism to be able to secure those assets, which is
You don't have to. You can use repayment protocols, which are
What do you mean by
something like connects. So something like connects, for example, repayment networks.
You also don't have to use wrapped protocols. I think I agree with both of you here. It's really interesting what you were saying, Chad, about not wanting to like build an app. But I think one of the things that with the EVM ecosystem like does offer is this access to a lot of users. So if you deploy a smart contract, you instantly have access to a huge market share of users, a lot of tooling like built around Web3. So it seems like the kind of place where it makes sense to launch something, and then once you have a following, then go build your own, specialized app chain that can be more performant. That's what we've seen DYDX do, or Cosmos chain. So I think it's just really interesting, this idea that we'll probably have one big EVM or like smart contract based platform where there are going to be like there is going to be like a large DEX. Like Uniswap will probably always be the one AMM where people go to pool ERC20s and swap between them. And then you don't need wrapped assets for that. So if you're just trading between assets in an ecosystem, I think something like Uniswap works well. There will always be a place for that. People will go there to try to test their idea, and then to get access to the liquidity, to the functionality that can be found from Uniswap or other applications deployed on the Ethereum ecosystem. But then once they become once they've validated their idea and they want to build it, they'll probably choose Cosmos as a place to do that. Does that sound like a fair assumption? So the market will lean toward one smart contract, and then amongst them one large smart contracting protocol, and then there will be lots of app chains via Cosmos. And you also agree then that there will also be like just one UTXO or proof of work store of value type chain, and that will always be Bitcoin.
Yeah, I do think there'll be effectively a primary winner in each of these kind of concepts of the smart contracting chain and the store of value chain and blah blah blah. Like each of these things will have some predominant winner that it has likely 70+% of the market share, and then there'll be a bunch of secondary things. So this is Google has like 90% of the market share on search engine, but there's also DuckDuckGo and Bing and I think AltaVisa even still exists or something like this. Yahoo Search, but yeah, I think I agree with that. That's the natural thing to happen in any capitalistic or system of a free market, is that there's centralization of power to create effective monopolies of some kind. That's why we see monopolies in like American history and other free market systems. There's always a tendency to not spread out capital to many different systems that provide the same service. There's always a tendency to kind of focus it on one or two that has the quote unquote trust of the society.
I slightly disagree with that. I think in terms of like Bitcoin is a bit different, because Bitcoin's main utilities, of store of value, the hedge against inflation, etc., sound money. It's not the on-chain utility. It's the meme around Bitcoin. Whereas with smart contract chains, it's a bit different. And considering that we're envisioning the future where the demand is going to be quite high, I would rather compare it with the car. The car manufacturers rather than with Google. So one of the reasons why we don't have one dominant brand, obviously we have brands like Toyota, which are like best sellers and produce quite a lot of cars, but we don't have one brand dominating everything. It's because they just don't have enough capacity to produce enough cars to satisfy all the demand. And I think it's the same.
It's more complicated than that. I mean, the reason why we haven't settled on this car,
there are multiple reasons.
Is price, is what kind of car they make. We when you buy a car, you're not buying a car for a specific purpose. Like, I mean, you are, but like, there's not a single point of why you buy a car. There's 101 different reasons. Well, I gotta get to work. I have to like do long drives across the country. I want to go down to the beach or something like this, and that all might like, I want to like be able to go up a fucking mountainside, and get something like a Jeep or whatever. So like, there's different use cases, and so there's not so much a predominant car manufacturer because there's different uses. In Google, for example, you're searching. There's only one reason to go to it is to search and to get results. Now, as long as the results are more or less the same between Google and DuckDuckGo and Bing, whatever, then I don't think anybody really gives a shit about like, the difference between one or the other. Google just becomes the dominant guy.
Then even within like one type of car, let's say a business class, 4-seater or 5-seater. But there are BMW 5 Series, there's E-Class, there's a lot of different brands making it. So it's even within this, like, I would say it's one use case, essentially. There's one certain cut of the whole market. There are still multiple brands.
Right, but the brands, like, they mean different things, and we attach our, like, even same thing with clothing. Like, I might wear J. Crew or Abercrombie and Fitch or like Tom Ford or like, I don't know. And so we attach our identity to these brands, and that's part of it. Like, people love to buy BMW because they associate that brand to mean success, for example, or somebody loves Jeep because it for them represents, they want to be seen as somebody who's like rugged and tough or something. I don't know. I'm making some shit up right here, but we can't compare brands and lifestyles to like blockchains and tools.
Chad, actually, I got a counterpoint to you. Google have become search engines have become like email competitors. Also, Google is like a Microsoft Office suite competitor, whereas say Proton is like a VPN competitor. A lot of these large Web 2 search engine companies have actually become like niche in other competitive business areas.
Sorry, I think I missed your example. I'm not sure if I understood it correct.
Okay. Google has become, like most search engines are email suites as well. Google is a free alternative or a competitor to like the Microsoft Office suite. They have they have documents. They also they're cloud storage competitors. Proton is an email service. They also have they're a VPN competitor and also a cloud storage competitor. I feel like in Web 2 there's also like a lot of branching out. I think there's something to what Toghrul is saying.
Yeah, no, there's something. I'm not trying to discount what Toghrul's saying. He's coming from a valid perspective and opinion. I think what you're doing there is you're conflating multiple Google's parent company is Alphabet, and there's lots of companies that produce lots of different products and services. They're obviously a conglomerate in many respects. But I wouldn't go as far to say that Google as a company. I'm more referring to Google as a search engine and how you compare to other search engines that are competing for the same space, right? And then you could say within storage, like Google's also has a storage product, right? Google Cloud, and there's also Dropbox, and there's also, almost every tech company has a storage, service of some kind because it's cheap and easy to build and profitable. So like that's a little bit different because like what cloud storage you use is relative to what kind of like computer you use. Like I use an Apple myself personally, and so I use iCloud for some things and Dropbox for some other things and something for something else. Like but that's a much more kind of complex and more nuanced topic.
Just to add something. So why I was saying that I don't think there's going to be a single winner is because there's no protocol, assuming that we reach a point where everybody's using blockchains on a daily basis to pay for stuff or whatever. And there's not a single protocol out there that can saturate the demand, so has enough supply in terms of block space, execution cycles, whatever, to saturate that demand. And so essentially, for example, I did a calculation with Ethereum with dank sharding, and like in the most optimistic scenario, you can get like 80,000 TPS if you like compress the shit out of zero knowledge, the batch commitments for zero knowledge rollups. And Solana can realistically do around 50 to 100,000 without basically raising the hardware requirements to a point where you have to have a supercomputer and like 10 gigabit connection to run it. And so from that perspective, I just think there's not a single protocol that can dominate, and will have a few, let's say Avalanche, Solana, Ethereum.
In terms of payments, I would agree. I would disagree with that, just because, at least in my opinion, the Lightning Network on Bitcoin can scale infinitely, right? Because all the transactions between person A and person B are done not on the chain specifically, so you don't require any block space for it. You just done it between each other. So that can scale basically as fast and as high as we effectively want it to. I mean, there's still scalability issues with it. I mean, there's still no liquidity on it. I mean, it's only got like, I think, 3,000 Bitcoin in total on that network, and blah, blah, blah. There's growth to be had. It's not ready for that today. But I think from a fundamentals perspective, from a first principles perspective, Lightning Network is more than capable of handling payments.
But Lightning Network can only scale to unlimited scale. It has unlimited scaling only in a scenario there are no fraudulent exits, etc., where you have to challenge on chain, and then you come to a certain limit, which is Bitcoin's block capacity. And on top of that, the routing and Lightning Network, etc., it's quite complex, and I just don't see a scenario in which Lightning Network is actually a viable use case for payments.
Well, the complexity, I'm not too worried about the complexity aspect of that. That is just computation to find the most optimal path to me to send you, because you and I don't have a contract with each other, but we both have a contract with Pluto, for example. I mean, that just like, I don't find that to be too much of a barrier. I think all that stuff is abstracted away from the user perspective as well. But I mean, I think I'm bullish on Lightning Network. I think it's totally practical for it to become the biggest problem that I have with Lightning Network in terms of a payment mechanism is that Bitcoin asset itself is not a stable asset. It's obviously very a volatile asset, but the volatility of Bitcoin or asset for that matter goes down with the market cap. Like, if Rune was $100 trillion market cap tomorrow, which obviously it wouldn't happen, but if it was, then it would be the most stable asset on the entire planet. It'd be more stable than the dollar or than oil, than anything else for that matter. And so as Bitcoin becomes a larger asset, and in my view, I see Bitcoin becoming the reserve currency for the planet at some point, maybe in 15 or 20 years. At that point, it would be so massive in size and market cap that it would be the most stable asset we've ever seen as a society. And then Lightning Network should be able to handle all those transactions pretty easily, I would think. But maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong about it.
So, guys, we're gonna wrap up at around the half hour here. So we have about 20 minutes left. Maybe
any other thoughts or questions or anything from the audience? Or
all right.
I don't think that Chad, you can hear FamiliarCow, but yeah, he was pretty much saying the same thing, that we were going to wrap up. We were going to wrap up here. Actually, if you go down as a Cow, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. If you just remove Chad as a speaker and then bring him back up, it might work.
Yeah, well, I was just saying that maybe we could just talk about some any specific trust examples with bridges in particular. All right. Looks like Chad just left.
I'm gonna relay that. Oh, he didn't see him left. Okay, so basically, for Chad, if you couldn't hear him but you are still in the audience, we'll just let him rejoin. Cool. There we go, Chad. So just for you, can you hear Tyler real quick? Mic check.
Hey.
Could you hear that?
Sorry, say it again. I was being transferred from stage.
Yeah, Chad, can you hear me right now?
Yeah, I can hear. Sorry, getting rugged by Twitter these days.
Dude, all right. I mean, we're even paying for this now, and Elon's still rugging us. This is going too far.
Yeah, it's been really broken recently.
Yeah, so I figured for the last 20 minutes, maybe we could just talk about any specific trust examples for bridges or specific designs that are currently in use that we could talk about, where those assumptions go astray and how that could lead to disaster in the future with bridges in particular, I think.
Of course. Feel free to give an example of what you want to discuss, because there's basically an infinite selection of disasters
Yeah,
and bridge
well,
designs that you
I'd
want
like
to
to hear
discuss.
which bridge disasters that you're currently have your eye on saying like, hey, this design is not proven and it will not work over in infinite scale of time, right?
And if THORChain happens to be one of them, definitely talk about that, because
Yeah, for
certainly
sure.
certainly if there's any criticism that you have, we're all ears, and I feel like that would be, a definitely a good point of discussion. If
Yeah, maybe
if there's specific things that you know about THORChain that you would think we could do differently.
yeah, let's start there, and if there's nothing there, then we can go to some other bridges. But let's just like spend the last 20 minutes on that.
No, I think from like the design perspective, I don't really have any criticism and etc. My main criticism was about the use of definitions, etc. But we already discussed that. The only concern that I have with THORChain, but it's not really limited to THORChain, it's applicable to a lot of different bridges and protocols that interchain protocols, is the sheer complexity of running the node, because you have to run the nodes for every single protocol on top of a THORChain node. And that just adds a lot of complexity to the operation. But I guess it's inevitable if you're going to run bridges between different protocols.
What about the number of validators that we have? Right now, it's like less than 100. I think the most we've ever had was 100. And I think the most that we can feasibly scale it to, just from like the Tendermint consensus layer, would be maybe around
300
to 300. Yeah, just depending on also like what your app is doing. So like, do you think that the number of validators is a concern as well?
I think ideally you would try to maximize it, but at the same time, relative to the vast majority of other bridges, it's much better. So I don't think that's like a necessarily like a pressing point of concern. Long term, I think it's a good thing to optimize and like, let's say, extend the number to 200, 300, whatever. But short term, I don't think it's a massive concern.
I mean, so one of the complexities of scaling the validators, other than the Cosmos limitations of like Tendermint, is that like there's a limitation on the minimum quantity of rune that each individual validator needs to have, which is like right now it's set to 300,000. So like then the question becomes like, how many people, or maybe small groups of people, have 300,000 rune like sitting in their pocket?
Can afford.
Like, is it 10,000? No, it's not anywhere close to 10,000. It's probably maybe 100. Maybe 150, to be honest with you. And if you lower that, say we're going to lower the minimum from 300,000 to like 100,000 or 50,000 or some number, you could do that, and they would allow more validators in some sense to churn into the network in that sense. But then the problem becomes that the security of the network is not the total sum of the bond, because you don't need to run 100% of the nodes to see all the assets. You can just run 2/3. So then you run the bottom 2/3 of bonds, and if most of them are $50,000 bonds, well then the actual security of the network is not the sum of all those. It's actually a bunch of $50,000 rune bonds.
Yeah, the lower bound essentially.
So you're actually, even though you're increasing the quantity of validators, you're actually decreasing the security of the network, as counterintuitive as that sounds at first glance. So what you want is as many nodes as you can get at really high rune quantity, because the higher the rune quantity each individual node, the more security that's actually provided. And so that becomes this kind of multifaceted kind of discussion about like, how do we scale the nodes in a way that actually increases security and increases decentralization, and that's hard to do for sure.
Yeah, I mean, staking bounds are really difficult in general. It's like, how do you define? Because you can't really price it in terms of real dollars. You have to like set the number in terms of your token, and you have to estimate how the token is going to perform. A lot of, so for example, when Ethereum was set as 32 ETH, Ethereum was trading at what, $100 to $100. So it was a completely different security model and an assumption of who can join, who can operate. Now it's trading at a completely different price. So you either have to constantly be changing it, or you have to just accept it. You set a certain number and just stick to it.
Right. Right.
Well, THORChain's dynamically changes based on the based on the amount of bond of the other nodes, right? It's not like a static type
Yeah,
thing, but I guess that's good. It's kind of in the weeds too much, but yeah.
but you still have a lower bound though, no? In terms of how much, or it doesn't
Yeah,
matter how much it is, it still dynamically changes.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a minimum set by like the demand to churn in, and there's a minimum that's set by there's just like a constant 300,000 rune. But we've seen that
Yeah,
we haven't had any 300,000 rune nodes churn in since we set that. Like since the multi-chain network was launched, the bid
yeah,
has been so high that it's never effectively dropped that low, which is really cool. It just means that there's an
fair.
actual like free market bidding for this.
Yeah, yeah, fair. Yeah, but that's what I mean. I meant more and as in, like, where do you set the lower bound to get it right? So let's say if you expand the network and get like 300, 400 validators, nodes, where do you set that bound?
Yeah. I mean, I'll say like one of the biggest concerns that I have about THORChain's design into the future, just to be like to have some good conversation, is that because THORChain uniquely is economically secured by its security, its amount of TVL is limited by that, right? Versus like something like Chainflip, which is going to be it's a competitor to THORChain in some sense. It hasn't launched yet. I'm sure it's going to come out in 2023 or whatever, but they don't really do economic security, so you can arbitrarily put in as much capital as you want. So they can grow their TVL much faster and more easily, in a sense, than THORChain reasonably can. And so then the question becomes, well,
Same thing with layer 0.
Yeah, same thing with layer 0. Like if you don't worry about security, then you can kind of grow things quickly. So then it becomes
Don't even.
Like,
layer 0, I have like there's a special place in hell for layer 0 on the way to design the like they basically typically you when you design a protocol, you first like brainstorm and think of assumptions that you want to build your protocol on. But layer 0 they built it the other way around. So they designed the protocol and they're like, oh yeah, what assumption can we fit for this protocol to work? And they just made up an assumption that doesn't exist in computer science and just said, yeah, that'll do.
Chad actually had a great conversation with Brian on Twitter Spaces, maybe like I want to say like 3 or 4 months ago or something like that. It was really interesting. It went on for a while, and he left basically being like,
because like one of the funny things about it is that came out as part of that conversation was that like they always talk about relayers and what's the other thing? Relayers and something else. Oracles. And how they can't collude.
He basically admitted that they had to adopt a THORChain like bond system for their relayers.
Yeah,
right. They had no mechanism to decentralize because they rely on these ideas of relayers and oracles to like maintain the security of these assets, like because they can't collude or whatever. But in reality,
yeah, but that's a made-up assumption. It didn't exist in computer science. You can't assume that. You can only assume that like a certain majority can't collude.
No. It's even worse than that. It's worse than that because who the relayers are, or who the oracles are, is determined by their multisig. And they have the ability to
I didn't know that.
To remove or add any relayers or oracles that they see fit, right? For whatever reason they want to add it. So it's not even as good as what you're describing right there. It's actually much worse than that.
So it's a multi-sig essentially.
It really is. And I asked him the question of like, well, how are you going to decentralize this? The guy's answer to me was, I don't know. The DAO will figure it out. That's what he said to me. And I was like, the DAO will figure it out? What the fuck?
Great. That always inspires confidence. That always inspires confidence.
Or we could adopt the THORChain's bond mechanism to secure it when pressed for it.
Right. And
it was pretty funny.
Then why don't you just build THORChain, which already exists at that point?
Yeah, but then why do you need the complexity of having the relayers and oracles? You just need to have one of them.
Right. Anyways, enough. I don't mean to shit on the project. I kind of hate doing it.
Yeah.
You goaded me into it, and I fell into the hole.
Yes. Sorry about that.
To the layer 0 people I was being obedient there, but
yeah. Brian's a nice guy. He's
Yeah.
just a little misled, maybe. I brought up Ellis from the audience. Maybe I asked a question. Hey.
Hey guys, good discussion. I had a question around the synth caps, raising those, because my understanding is kind of as the synth caps are raised to create more space for savers, we have something called protocol on liquidity that would be turned on, that would allow the sort of the nodes and the protocol to sort of allow for scaling of those pools. My question is like, how does this increasing leverage in the system add more risk? And I think my concern is that the nodes tend to be incentivized towards leveraging up and adding more risk to the system. And one level, I want to believe this is like totally going to work. On another level, it's scary as hell. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk about the risks that go up as we hit like say 80% synth cap and then protocol and liquidity. Like what would happen beyond that or what sort of attack vectors open there or increase as we hit that?
No, it's a fair and valid question. So there's two risks to be thinking about within the context of that, right? Like two high level things, and you can break into like the details of each individual one. One is the increased risk to the LPs. So the higher the synth utilization of the network, the synth utilization per pool, the more of a kind of a leverage room position that the LPs are taking, the more room price they're taking versus the asset. That's the risk that the LPs would be taking, right? And that's part of the reason why, if the network were to go to 80%, I'm not saying it will, or that I'm saying we should go there, but just hypothetically, if it were, one of the arguments for that is just that the POL itself would be basically the LP of the network, and regular dual LPs would more or less go away, and they would just become savers people, and then the protocol itself would take on the dual sided. That's the first part. The second part is, well, how do we know that the network has enough value to back the value of the synths of the savers, right? And so in an example of when the POL is enabled, effectively you're using the price chain, the pool plus the value of the reserve. So in the scenario where hypothetically there was a 50% synth utilization, how much of a price shift of rune going down does it has to happen before there's not enough value to support the value of the collateral? And in that scenario, I think that the number is like 13 point something x. I can't remember off the top of my head because it's been a while, but about 13x of a price change to go through the value of the pool and then also the value of the reserve. If you went higher than that and you went to like an 80% synth utilization, the price change would be about like an 8.6 or 8.3 or something like this. To trigger that scenario of that quote unquote disaster scenario of the synth are the value of the synth is greater than the value of the assets backing it effectively. And so that becomes like the debate that the community should have, right? It's like, how much risk is too much risk and how much risk is not enough risk, and there's a balance to be struck there. I mean, even in the context of like, if you look at Rune's price historically speaking, if you look at when the network was exploited, right, back in a year and a half ago in those earliest days of beta, what shift did we see in that scenario relative to Bitcoin? And the answer is I think it's like 4.8x price change in that particular example, right, of like exploits, lost funds, stop the network for a few months to kind of reevaluate security, blah, 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 and figure out what the best way to move forward. And then another kind of example of like a huge price shift in Rune's history would be like just the regular move from bull market to bear market, because Bitcoin went from $60,000 a coin to $16,000 a coin, and Rune went from I think $20 or $21 per coin down to basically $1 at more or less the bottom. And what does that price change relative to Bitcoin? That's about a 5.3 price change. So in Rune's history, we've never seen anything greater than a 5x. In the most extreme examples, we've seen like a 5x price change of like exploits of bear markets, like this kind of like extreme examples of large price changes relative to Bitcoin. And so if we go to 80% centralization and we're going down at like 8.3 below whatever how the number actually is, then like, is that do we feel confident about that as a community or not? And people can have different viewpoints of whether or not 80% is too much, or whether or not 50% is too much, or whether or not 30% is too much. Like everybody can come down this wherever they want. And I have my opinion and you have your opinion, and that's well and good. But this is what we want to understand. This is what I want, especially validators, to understand is this is the risks at hand that we're talking about. Do the math, do your homework, understand these concepts, and then come down to where you think as a validator we should be moving towards as a community.
Yeah, and I think I often hear about this talked to in terms of like capital efficiency, like wanting to make the network more capital efficient. I just don't know if we're considering like risk efficiency as well here, where people will not necessarily want to hold the Rune asset or go into this network knowing that the protocol itself has become, and maybe the general public starts to disagree with the nodes or say, it's just too much risk, and now the price of Rune goes down or whatever.
100%. That is totally a valid perspective, and maybe the nodes think this is not too risky, and maybe you as a Rune holder think that it's too risky, and so you chose to sell your Rune or whatever. That's totally valid. Like that's just part of the voting process, and sometimes like you can vote with your Rune just by buying more or selling it, right? And validators vote with their Rune to vote for changes in the protocol in a sense. So that's totally valid, right? And that's something we have to kind of like together, as a community to figure out what we feel as a community is the best thing. For right now, personally, I want to see us go to 50%, and the reason why that is because it allows us to turn on the POL without downside to the Rune price, without sell pressure in the Rune asset. But also, there's a secondary reason. That is because at a 50% utilization, the protocol makes the largest percentage of the yield from the pools, right? Because if the protocol holds 50% of the pool from a dual LP perspective, and it's making 50% of the savers yield because they only earn half their yield, and the LP, aka the POL, makes the other 50%. That means that the protocol itself is earning 75% of the yield from the pools, right? Which is a high percentage, which obviously is good for the protocol. The protocol likes this for obvious reasons, and so you can get to a scenario that wouldn't be this year or maybe not even next year, but you can get to a scenario where the amount of yield the network is producing from that 75% is greater than the block rewards that are being emitted from the reserve itself. And so then you get to a really fascinating situation where not only is the protocol earning a bunch of money, but it's effectively pulling Rune out of circulating supply and putting it back into the reserve, reducing the circulating supply of Rune itself, right? But if you were to go up to 80%, you wouldn't be at 75% of the yield of the pool. You'd be, I think it's closer to 60 or 65%. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. But yeah, it'd be 65% because you're holding 20% and you're getting half of that, so 40, 60%. Yeah. So you'd be getting 60% of the yield, but you're not deploying as much capital into the pools because you only deploy 20% instead of 50%. So it could get to this kind of funny and fascinating situation where the POL becomes not only the dual side LP of the network, but also just effectively taking its yield and just removing it from circulating supply. Like that would be really quite kind of fascinating. And by the way, the other benefit of that, if you haven't already figured it out, is that the more Rune that exists in the reserve, the safer the synths get, right? Because right now the reserve effectively has I think 35% of the supply of Rune, because it's 500 million in total. It's 170. Let's do the math real quick. 34% of the supply of Rune. And so if more Rune is being taken out of circulating supply and put into reserve, and we go to 200 million Rune, gone from 34% to 40%. And so now the ability for the network to back the value of the synths just increased because the amount of Rune that it has been increasing as a percentage of the total Rune in supply. So that it also becomes true with lending as well, right? As lending, people are buying up Rune and burning a huge quantity of Rune and reducing the circulating supply. That means that the percentage of Rune that the reserve has also increases. So in effect, if Rune starts to become deflationary just from the POL earning all that revenue, and Rune becomes deflationary because of the lending design and protocol where we're just removing Rune from the circulating supply, that inherently creates more safety, or makes it more safe for the network to be able to back those synths and those savers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I was curious if Toghrul has any thoughts on this.
Sorry, I disconnected a bit for the last minute. What was the question?
Oh, just I guess the security of the overall economic design as Chad was talking about, but I think there is definitely a sweet spot, Chad. Yeah, and maybe it is 50%, maybe it's higher, but it's an interesting thing because I think we've never seen this before in cryptocurrency, as far as I know, an economic dynamic like this. So I guess we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, there definitely are. It for sure is a novel concept and a novel design, and it breaches on new ideas we haven't seen or tested in the crypto space before. But I think the value prop of what it's offering is supremely valuable, not just for the THORChain community, but for the greater crypto industry. I think that's worth exploring, experimenting with.
Cool. Let's just do one last question here from it's Bran, and then we can wrap up for today. So, hey, Bran.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Hey,
Great,
great.
how are you?
Good, thanks.
Good.
Yeah, I just got one question. I think I've looked into THORChain recently, and I really like it a lot. Like I've been looking for really strong cryptos to put my money in the bear market, and I really like THORChain. And I think it's very useful for people who use MetaMask and Trust Wallet, and people that don't want to use exchanges. But I just got one small question: do you guys think, like, how confident are you that like big exchanges in the future with a lot of volume will be using THORChain every day, and how do you plan on like gaining trust with like big centralized exchanges to use the application, as not just like private users with MetaMask and Trust Wallet, but like really big exchanges as far as Binance, Webull, and stuff like that?
Yeah, I can speak to that one. So basically, they don't have to trust us, and they can just go and see for themselves. If they send Bitcoin to this address, they can receive back Ethereum to another address. That's something that they can test out with any quantity. And we expect them to start small and start with little quantities. And that's actually how we saw people like during Trust Wallet, during their integration. Any developer, anyone who operates an exchange or a wallet, you are essentially beholden to your users when you cross into that sort of trusted land. Wallet users trust the Trust Wallet application not to like sniff their keys and post them to some server so that some developer can steal all their crypto. People expect exchanges not to loan their crypto out or do that. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But if you are going to talk about in this like world of like these sort of trusted interactions between people and application developers, those application developers, they have their reputation on the line whenever they go and integrate something. So Trust Wallet, for example, we tell them, hey, look, this is the API. Like all you do is send crypto to this address and you'll receive back crypto at that address. And so what do? They test that. They send a few test transactions and they say to themselves, oh, hey, look, this thing actually does work. And through more conversations, they come to learn more. They say, well, where does the yield come from? Like they'll ask us questions about, how does this thing actually even work? And we answer questions. We point them in the direction of the white paper, and we just talk to them. And through that sort of experience, we come to like a shared understanding where they, for whatever reason, trust THORChain. I can't tell you why everyone will or will not trust THORChain, but all I can do is say that the team at Nine Realms and the core team, we do our best to educate people on why you should trust THORChain. And then so from there, people will start to integrate once they realize that THORChain is a source of reliable liquidity. And so, it's not like we want to go out and tell centralized exchanges, hey, you should use us, but I don't think that that's really like, that's not our prerogative to do. Centralized exchanges will start to realize once like every wallet has integrated them and is allowing people to swap, that's an important thing, that there's good high quality liquidity on THORChain. So they might start to like basically source liquidity from THORChain, and that's something that they may do. They may even allow people to like swap within their app directly on THORChain and take an affiliate fee that is greater than or equal to what they currently charge on their exchange. Like, what do they care if you're using their order book or THORChain's AMM, as long as they get paid, right? So I think that's just like the general approach that we're taking is kind of like as the dominoes fall, people will just realize THORChain is a trustable place to go. It's a place that you feel like you can send your Bitcoin because you'll receive back Ethereum, because it's done that for hundreds of thousands of other people before, and that's just kind of like, it has a reputation, it has a track record. We like to come up on stage here and talk about the definitions of trust, trustless, minimize trust. But I think, from the philosophical perspective, we can all agree at the end of the day, everyone has to trust something, or nothing is real, right? So, I think that there's sort of like those boundaries where it's like end users kind of trust either their exchange or their wallet developer. Wallet developers trust THORChain, and then THORChain doesn't have to trust anyone because we're a completely enclosed, self-sustaining system that doesn't have any external dependencies. And so there's a very clear chain of what's going to happen if I take this action with THORChain.
And I'll just wrap up by saying that it's a long process for them to gain that trust for the developers at like Trust Wallet in this example, to understand that THORChain is this trust minimized system and to gain their own trust for it. It took a little over a year for that Trust Wallet integration to actually happen, from like the first conversations to the actual like shipped live, and it's not even fully live yet for everybody on iOS, right? So like they've been doing research on THORChain for basically the past year, due diligence, tearing it apart, figuring it out, and then actually implementing it in the app. And that's just that's what these companies be able to say, like, hey, this is a safe source of swaps, to then turn around and offer that to people who are trusting them in their app, right? So everyone's going to have to do their own due diligence, and it'll take a lot of time for people to gain that trust. And that's ultimately what it comes down to, is just like time and experience. And as more people use it and as more people understand, more people will just understand what THORChain is and what it does, and the assumptions that come with using THORChain rather than like another bridge or swap service or centralized service. So
yes, and that's exactly why we do these Twitter spaces, and why we get up and talk every Friday about THORChain, is because we believe strongly that people can trust it. We don't think that they should do their own research, they should verify that. But we get up and we talk about this. We have guests like Toghrul on the show to rigorously debate and challenge our ideas and our assumptions, so that we don't make any, so we can make as few mistakes as possible when designing this. So I guess with that, that's a good segue to thank Toghrul, especially for your time, for coming here, and for helping us in our mission of making THORChain, the most trust minimized and the best decentralized exchange. So we really appreciate the feedback and the rigorous intellectual debate. This has been really great. And I definitely know next time someone asks, how does THORChain economically secured, like, this is the Twitter space I'll be sending them.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed that. It was loads of fun.
And thanks, Chad, too, for leading that entire discussion. Your energy and ability to debate rigorously is unmatched. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Pluto, and thanks, Toghrul, for coming out.
Awesome. I think FamiliarCow, the host, might be having connection issues, but Cal, if you're there, I think we can wrap up this space now. Thanks, everybody.